Israel could be responding as early as Monday to Iran's unprecedented retaliatory attack on Israel over the weekend. U.S. President Joe Biden says the U.S. won't take part in any Israeli counterattack. Following the ruling party's crushing defeat in the general election last week, President Yoon will give a live address tomorrow at a cabinet meeting. Eyes are on what message he will deliver about reform. Semiconductor exports in March show a robust performance for the fifth straight month, leading South Korea's tech sector forward. It's April 15th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. Iran's unprecedented retaliatory attack on Israel over the weekend is fueling fears of a widespread war in the Middle East. U.S. reports say Israel could be responding as soon as Monday. Moon Hae-ryun leads us off.
Following the first ever direct overt attack against Israel by Iran from its own territory on Saturday night, involving more than 300 missiles and drones, global leaders are responding with urgency in a bid to ease escalating tensions. The Wall Street Journal reported that US and Western officials are anticipating retaliatory action by Israel as soon as Monday, but are pushing to prevent hostilities from spiraling further out of control as Israel weighs its response to the attack. U.S. President Joe Biden warned that Washington would not participate in any counter-offensives launched against Iran and would only continue to assist in defending Israel, after it helped to shoot down most of the missiles launched on Saturday alongside other allies. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told his counterparts in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey over separate phone calls to reiterate Washington's stance. However, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said that what happens next is up to Israel to decide.
It's going to be up to the Israelis to decide what the next step is here. I will just say this. President Biden, since the beginning of this conflict, has worked very hard to keep this from becoming a broader regional war.
Leaders of the wealthy group of 7 nations convened a meeting and unanimously condemned Iran's attack. In a statement released by the White House following the meeting, the leaders said that they had demanded Iran cease its attacks and that they stood ready to take further measures in response to future actions that could destabilize the region. The attacks are seen as a response to a suspected Israeli strike on Iran's embassy compound in Syria earlier this month that killed top Revolutionary Guards commanders, and after the months-long war in the Gaza Strip that has led to the loss of thousands of civilian lives. That being said, the damage wrought on Israel was minimal. An Air Force base was reported hit but operational, and a child injured by shrapnel. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The international community was quick to respond. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting over the weekend in New York, where there was a major face-off between ambassadors from Iran and Israel. Kim Jong-soo has this report.
An emergency meeting upon the urgent request of Israel took place on Sunday local time at the UN headquarters in New York. Ambassadors from Iran and Israel both appeared, with Iran claiming the justification of its military strikes on Saturday, saying it only targeted military objectives and were carried out carefully to minimize the potential for escalation.
Iran's operation was entirely in the exercise of Iran's inherent right to self-defense as outlined in Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations and recognized by international law.
The Israeli ambassador to the UN, on the other hand, strongly condemned Iran, saying he has warned continuously and asked the Security Council to take concrete action against Iran's Ayatollah regime.
Iran, the #1 global sponsor of terror, has exposed its true face as the destabilizer of the region and the world.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for maximum restraint, saying now it's the time to defuse and de-escalate.
The Middle East is on the brink. It's time to step back from the brink. It's vital to avoid any action that could lead to major military confrontations on multiple fronts in the Middle East.
Most member countries, including South Korea, have urged all parties concerned to come up with measures to prevent further escalation. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Also in related news, Korea's brakes on fuel tax will remain in place for 2 more months amid the fresh outbreak of violence in the Middle East. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
The South Korean government has decided to extend fuel tax cuts through June as growing tensions in the Middle East are expected to lead to soaring global oil prices. That's according to the opening remarks made by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok during an emergency economic meeting on Monday.
Depending on how the situation continues to develop, risks surrounding energy and supply chains and the volatility in the finance market may grow. As such, the government will remain vigilant and establish a pan-governmental emergency response system to respond accordingly.
The government's announcement means that the 25% cut in fuel tax has been extended 2 more months after last being extended through April and February. This cut, which has been in place since January 1st, means fuel tax is currently 615 won, or roughly 44 US cents per liter, rather than roughly 59 cents per liter. This means consumers can save roughly $18 a month on fuel. The decision comes as Iran launched hundreds of drones and missiles toward Israel on Saturday night, 12 days after an Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy complex in Syria. While most of the strikes were reportedly intercepted by Israel and its partners, it has increased fears over a broader war. The government will also maintain the 37% fuel tax cut on diesel and liquefied petroleum gas for 2 more months. With this, the tax on diesel stands at 27 cents and LPG at 9 cents. The finance minister also said that pan-governmental efforts will be made to monitor both domestic and global economic trends in real time to prepare for a range of possible scenarios. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, met with South Korea's Defense Minister Shin Won-sik in Seoul on Monday to discuss cooperation against North Korean threats. The U.S. envoy explained that Washington is exploring alternatives following Russia's recent veto on renewing the UN panel monitoring sanctions on North Korea. She called for close cooperation from allies, including South Korea. The envoy also held talks with Foreign Minister Cho Tae on the same day. The meetings were held as part of her 4-day visit to Seoul. This is the first trip to South Korea by a U.S. ambassador to the UN since 2016. Following the crushing defeat of the ruling party at last week's general election, President Yoon will make a live address during a cabinet meeting tomorrow to set out how his administration will undergo reform. Our presidential office correspondent Woo Soo-young has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will deliver a live message on Tuesday, laying out how his administration will reform itself after the general election last week handed the opposition an unprecedented majority in parliament. Yoon's officials told the media on Monday that the president will personally convey his remarks on the outcome of the election during the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday, rather than hold a press conference or make a televised address to the nation. The leader released a brief statement last week through his chief of staff, vowing to reform his government's management of state affairs and to focus on improving the economy and people's livelihoods. Yoon's speech is likely to set out a more detailed course of self-reform and how his administration plans to work with an opposition-held parliament for the next 3 years, as his major policy initiatives hang in the balance. Yoon's officials have hinted the reform will start with a major overhaul of senior figures in the administration. Once the candidates have been screened, the president is set to name a new chief of staff and prime minister after they offered to resign last Thursday, along with all his senior secretaries. While Yoon previously appointed former civil servants as his chief of staff, the incoming candidate is likely to be a political heavyweight who can skillfully work with an opposition-held parliament and make astute responses to major domestic issues and crises. The rumoured candidates are Transport Minister Won Il-yong, former opposition leader and National Unity Committee Chair Kim Han-gil, lawmaker Jang Jae-won, and Interior Minister Lee Sang-min. More high-ranking staff, including senior secretaries for press, society and political affairs, are expected to be replaced. But the Chief of Staff for Policy and senior aides for Economy and Science may retain their positions for continuity. Appointing a new PM could take longer, as it requires parliamentary approval. The likely candidates include Kim Han-gil once again, as well as former Unification Minister Kwon Young-se and ruling party lawmaker Chu Oh-young, who were re-elected for their 5th and 6th terms respectively. To fully reform the management of state affairs, his office is considering a major cabinet reshuffle and the restructuring of the presidential office to make it more receptive to public opinion. This could involve resurrecting the position of Senior Secretary for Civil Affairs, or creating a new division to facilitate better engagement with Parliament and the public. Ha-seong, Arirang News.
Now to the latest in the standoff between the government and doctors. For the first time since the general election, the government has reiterated its commitment to expanding the medical school admission quota, while trainee doctors are accusing the government of an abuse of power. Song Yoo-jin reports.
It seems there's still a big hurdle to overcome in the standoff between the Korean government and trainee doctors regarding the expansion of the medical school admission quota. During Monday's Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters meeting, Health Minister Cho Kyu-hong said the government's will for medical reform remains unchanged. This includes a planned increase in the medical school admission quota by 2,000 from next year to tackle the country's shortage of doctors in essential medical fields and rural regions.
We'd urge the medical community to stop their collective action and promptly engage in dialogue. We have a tight timeline, considering the college admission schedule for 2025.
The college admission guidelines for the 2025 academic year will be finalized next month, including the medical school quota. Making changes to the quota after that will be impossible. While standing firm on the expansion, the minister mentioned the government's openness to discussing rational and unified alternatives, echoing its previous stance, which hinted at the possibility of adjusting the scale of expansion. However, trainee doctors remain strongly opposed to the expansion. 1,360 trainee doctors who have submitted their resignation letters announced on Monday that they would file a complaint against Minister Cho and Second Vice Health Minister Bang Min-soo with the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials for alleged abuse of power and obstruction of the exercise of rights. They're saying the government misused its power to block hospitals from processing their resignation letters and force them to work against their will by issuing return-to-work orders. One of the 7 requests trainee doctors made to the government to return to work in February was the complete removal of the expansion plan. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, Korea's ICT exports continue to rake in profits, expanding for the 5th month in a row in March, driven by a tangible recovery in the semiconductor sector. Shin Se-byuk has the latest trade numbers.
Semiconductor exports have sustained double-digit growth for the 5th consecutive month, driving South Korea's tech sector forward. Data released by the Trade Ministry on Monday shows that ICT exports in March rose 19.4% on year to nearly $18.8 billion. This marked the 5th consecutive month of year-on-year increases for the nation's tech exports overall and the 3rd straight month of double-digit growth. According to the ministry, chips led the charge, with exports reaching $11.7 billion for an increase of 34% on year. The growth in the artificial intelligence market has significantly boosted demand for semiconductors. Recovering demand for IT devices such as mobile phones and PCs has also propelled chip exports to their highest levels since June 2022, when they hit $12.5 billion. Other sectors also saw robust growth, indicating a strong recovery in overall ICT exports. Shipments of displays climbed more than 13% on year as both OLED and LCD panel exports were up. Computer exports also recorded a 20% year-on-year increase, marking 3 consecutive months of growth. But the mobile sector as a whole saw its exports tumble by 7% compared to the previous year to $220 million due to a weakened global demand for mobile phone parts. By country, China remains the largest market for exports, with $8.4 billion worth of shipments in March, up 32.5% from last year, and marking year-on-year growth for the fifth consecutive month. Vietnam and the United States followed with exports of $3 billion and $2.3 billion, respectively. Meanwhile, ICT imports for March stood at $11.7 billion, leading to a trade surplus of just over $7 billion. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics topped the global smartphone market once again in Q1 this year, mainly due to good sales performance in its recent Galaxy S24 series. According to a market research firm IDC on Monday, Samsung accounted for more than 20% of the total market share, with over 60 million mobile phone shipments in the first quarter. Its rival Apple, which was first place in Q4 of last year, accounted for some 17% to come in second. Chinese manufacturer Xiaomi ranked third place. The Netflix comedy drama Beef has won the 2024 Writers Guild Award in the limited series category. Korean-American director Lee Sung-jin was awarded for his contributions to the screenplay. The 76th annual ceremony was held simultaneously in New York and Los Angeles on Sunday, honoring outstanding writing across various media platforms, including film and television. Beef has now swept 3 of the major 4 Guild Awards in Hollywood this year. It won a Producers Guild of America award, while lead actors Ali Wong and Korea-born American actor Steven Yeun dominated the Screen Actors Guild Awards for their outstanding performance in their respective categories. Over in New York on this Monday, former U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to stand in a criminal court on charges of bribery to suppress a scandal ahead of the presidential race in 2016. No former U.S. president has sued in court as a criminal defendant in American history. Lee Seung-jae covers this latest development and its broader implications.
Donald Trump will become the first former U.S. president to ever stand before a criminal trial, with his lawyers, prosecutors, and Justice Juan Merchan set to pick jurors in a New York courtroom on Monday to hear evidence on charges related to allegations that he paid hush money to prevent a sex scandal ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Trump has been indicted on 34 felony counts for falsifying company records linked to money allegedly paid through his lawyer Michael Cohen to prevent the disclosure of his past sexual relationship with a former adult film star, Stormy Daniels, just before the 2016 presidential election. While Trump faces a total of 4 criminal trials, this is the only criminal case scheduled for trial before the November presidential election. Trump has strongly denied the allegations of manipulating his company's accounting figures and that he had a sexual relationship with Daniels. He has claimed that the allegations are politically motivated by the Democrats. As the defendant in the criminal case, Trump must appear in court throughout the trial, scheduled 4 days a week, excluding Wednesdays for about 6 to 8 weeks. So much time spent in court could be a crucial setback for the former president at a time when he should be focusing on his election campaign. While Trump's team of lawyers have made an all-out effort to postpone the trial until after the presidential election, it was not accepted by the court. Each of his 34 indictments carries the possibility of a 4-year prison term, with Trump certain to appeal any guilty verdict and sentence. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us in the studio is our sports editor, Paul Need. Hello, Paul.
Hello there.
Let's first start with Major League Baseball. It has been yet another busy weekend for Kim Ha-seong.
Yes, very productive indeed for him. His San Diego Padres beat the LA Dodgers 2-1 in the series. On Sunday, in a game that the Padres went on to win 6-3, Kim drew 4 walks. That's the most he's achieved in a single MLB game. In the game before that, which the Dodgers won 5-2, Kim Ha-seong hit his third double of the season. It came with the Padres 4-1 down in the top of the 7th inning with no runners and 2 out. He hit a sinker from starting pitcher Gavin Stone. On Friday, the first in the series, and a game that the Padres won 8-7, he hit a solo home run off the highest-earning pitcher in MLB, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. It came at the top of the 2nd inning to give the Padres a 3-1 lead. Fans got their money's worth with this one as the game was won in the 11th inning. Meanwhile, Lee Jong-hoo of the San Francisco Giants was able to extend his hitting streak to a career-best 6 matches. He went 1 for 5 with a steal and a run scored on Sunday in the Giants' 9-4 defeat to the Tampa Bay Rays. His run was his 7th of the season and 3rd in as many matches.
All right, and moving on to golf now, the Masters, a career best for An Byung-hun.
Yes, that's right. He finished tied for 16th at 2 over par. This places An as the highest-ranked Asian golfer at this year's Masters, and it was his best finish in what was his 5th appearance at the opening major of the year. But only the top 12 are invited back for next year's Masters. He missed out by a single stroke. American Scotty Scheffler won the tournament outright, his 2nd green jacket at Augusta National. He finished at 11 under, 4 strokes clear of Sweden's Ludwig Øyberg. Meanwhile, Kim Shi-hoo and Kim Joo-hyung finished tied for 30th at 5 over.
To football now, there are brand new champions of Germany.
Yes, Bayer Leverkusen on Sunday sealed their first ever top division title in Germany, the first in the club's 120-year history. Leverkusen are also the first new champions of Germany since 2009, when Wolfsburg won the Bundesliga that year. And it's the first time that a team other than Bayern Munich have won the league since 2011. The title was sealed on Sunday following a 5-0 win over Werder Bremen. Leverkusen now have 16 points more than their Bavaria rivals Bayern Munich, with just 15 points left to play for. Leverkusen are led by Spanish manager Xavi Alonso, who has been linked with Liverpool to replace Jurgen Klopp and Bayern to replace Thomas Tuchel, but now looks set to stay with the club. When he took over in October 2022, the team was 2nd bottom of the table.
Remarkable. Finally, to badminton, a long overdue win for South Korea at the Asian Championships.
Yes, the team of Lee So-hee and Baek Hana on Sunday won the women's doubles title. That's a first for Korea in 19 years since Lee Kyung-won and Lee Hyo-jung in 2005. In Nanjing, in China, the pair beat Zhang Shuchuan and Zheng Yu 2-0, 23-21 and 21-12. This comes after the pair also won the All England Open last month. In the mixed doubles, Korea's So Sung-jae and Chae Yu-jong finished runners-up to the hosts, China 2-1.
It looks like all boats were well for the Olympics coming up later this year. Thank you, Paul. See you next week.
Thank you. See you.
Rain is falling across the country, suiting the dryness. Rain continued during the day today, but the rain clouds will gradually recede by the end of the day. Looking at the amount of rain, the southern coast of Gyeongsangnam-do province will have the most rain, concentrated at up to 60 millimeters. As the rain clouds gradually move eastward, the rain will gradually die down in the western parts of the country.
Early summer heat came over the weekend. The soaring high temperatures have been dampened by the rain. Today's daytime temperatures were 5 to 10 degrees lower than yesterday, back to the levels of previous years. Warm mornings will be seen all over the country tomorrow. Seoul, Daejeon, and Gyeongju at 12 degrees Celsius. By tomorrow morning, most of the rain will have stopped and skies will be clear again. Daily highs will move up to at least 20 degrees nationwide. Warm weather will continue throughout the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Children's laughter, hope, dream. K-animation belongs in them. Interesting and valuable story that transcends between everyday life and dream. Surprising spectacle where imagination becomes real. An array of subjects catering from infants to adolescents. For our story to reach all corners of the world. K-animation makes healthy laughter for children. Completely new. But something anyone can relate with. Flawlessly made. And tears that go with it. K-drama. Korea is coming at you with another story to tell.
We came up with an idea of making an idol group.
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Handan in Seoul. North Korea celebrated the Day of Sun, marking the 112th birthday of the state's founder and Kim Jong-un's late grandfather, Kim Il-sung. There were no large-scale military parade or missile provocations, but the reclusive state called for continual loyalty for Kim Jong-un, marking the day, one of the most important holidays in the North. Kim Jong-un, meanwhile, held talks with a top Chinese official in Pyongyang, which marked the North's highest level talks with China in years, where the two sides reaffirmed their friendly ties. For some insights into the latest moves by North Korea and regional players, we're joined by Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Thank you for coming in.
Good to be here.
Also with us is Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, who joins us from Washington, D.C. It's so great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Dr. Go, let's start off with you. So the festive mood was observed throughout North Korea today, marking Kim Il-sung's birthday. And the North seized the chance to call for continual loyalty for Kim Jong-un. But its reference to the day as the Day of Sun has been notably reduced. How do you see this?
So I think North Korea tries to project itself as a normal country when it engages with the outside world more actively. For instance, back in the 2017, 18, and 19, when North Korea was engaged in diplomacy with the United States and outside world, they tried to project the country as if it's a more normal country, less of a country dominated by a personality cult, and more like a liberal and open-minded. For instance, they invite a lot of foreigners to Pyongyang, so for instance, to engage in marathons or tourism. So these are the faces in North Korea's diplomatic moves. So I think this year, or since last year, North Korea has been engaged actively after the end of the COVID, opened up the country. It's right now reaching out to, for instance, like Europeans to come to the country to visit for tourism. We know that Kim Jong-un has had several meetings with visiting foreign dignitaries. And also he met with the Russian President Vladimir Putin last year. So North Korea clearly is in a very proactive stage right now. And I think the regime's advisors probably are thinking that the regime will benefit in terms of PR by reducing references to the regime's idiocracies, such as corporate personality around the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, with the name of the day, like the Day of the Sun, gives the impression that it's more of a Kim Il-sung is not a normal founder, but also almost a demigod kind of figure. So I think they're trying to dial down this kind of perception for the foreigners. I think it's going to be temporary anyways. It's going to make a return later on, but then it's one of the faces.
So it could be part of North Korea's efforts to dial down idolization of Kim Jong-un's predecessors like Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And part of that reason, some experts say, is to maximize the authority of Kim Jong-un as well. Do you also agree with that?
Well, that has also been the case. I mean, in North Korea, the single source, the only source of legitimacy comes from the fact that you're the descendant of Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, that never went away. Just this time around, it was kind of strange that the regime tried to somehow dial down the reference to Kim Il-sung as the sun, or Day of the Sun, and tried to give the perception that it's more of a normal national holiday, or if it's a traditional holiday of the Korean nation. So in that sense, I think it's more of a political maneuvering on the part of the regime with an eye on the outside world to make Kim Jong-un look normal rather than some strange hereditary leader of North Korea.
And Dr. Klingner, a top-ranking Chinese official, Zhao Leji, visited Pyongyang ahead of Kim Il-sung's birthday. What significance does his visit hold?
It's another step in the improving relations between North Korea and China, which had been a bit quiet recently, especially in light of a lot of focus being placed on the North Korean-Russian relationship and a lot of artillery ammunition and missiles going from North Korea to Russia. And during the COVID pandemic, Chinese and North Korean trade certainly was down to almost zero, if not zero. Even illegal smuggling had been canceled between the two countries. But during this 75th year of the diplomatic relations between China and North Korea, both countries have said they would strengthen, affirm this relationship, and we may even have summit meetings between North Korea and China. So I think it's a way of affirming the very important Chinese-North Korean economic trade relationship. And China accounts for over 90% of North Korea's foreign trade. So even though the focus has really been on this North Korean-Russian relationship, which is quite new, the underlying, more important Chinese-North Korean relationship is certainly going to continue.
So it holds its significance in that the two countries reaffirmed their friendly ties, and you mentioned that it served as a chance for the two nations to further boost their economic cooperations. And some experts point out that it comes after the UN monitoring on North Korea sanctions. It comes when the UN monitoring on North Korea's sanctions has been terminated, and so concerns are high that Pyongyang, Beijing may more actively seek various forms of economic cooperation that could perhaps include some illegal activities, and something that could violate the UN sanctions as well. But that's a whole different story. Now, Dr. Ko, what's your assessment of Zhao's meeting with Kim Jong-un, and do you also believe that the meeting will set the tone for Kim Jong-un's possible visit to Beijing this year?
Well, it's likely. It's one of the Zhang Leji's visit marks probably the highest ranking Chinese politicians visit to North Korea in recent years. It's number 3 in the overall ranking of the power structure of the Chinese Communist Party. He's a member of the Politburo Standing Committee. And then it's very interesting that the timing of the visit coincides, not the fact that this happens to be the birthday of the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, but comes after the news reports of Vladimir Putin's potential visit to North Korea has emerged. So in that sense, I think there's a little bit of competition going on between Beijing and Moscow for North Korea's loyalty, I would say. And I think, there have been reports that China is a little bit concerned that North Korea was growing a little too close to Moscow. We know there's a little bit of a rivalry between Russia and China when it comes to North Korea, because North Korea has a very strategic location and then position in the Far East Asia. So I think the Chinese want to remind the North Koreans that not just that the North Koreans depend on China for trade and other types of assistance, but then now, in addition to that, China is also putting a lot of attention to the country. Therefore, the North Koreans should essentially pay attention to Chinese interest in the region. And also, it's interesting that there's the type of visit that's being right now, guessed right now, in terms of a visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin to North Korea, and also the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, that the former, we're talking about Putin's visit to North Korea, which is a reciprocal visit to Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia last year. And now we're talking about Kim Jong-un going to China. And I think this is a very important difference. I think the Chinese are concerned about the optics of a Chinese president going to North Korea, which would really affect the mood in the region, especially in South Korea and Japan, that China had become rogue like Russia has become. So I think the Chinese are trying to avoid that image, but at the same time want to cement their relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang. So again, within the framework of this strange competition that's going on between Moscow and Beijing for North Korea's affection. So I think this difference in tone is really remarkable. And I think given that, but then at the same time, we know what the power relationship is between Pyongyang and Beijing right now. Always Beijing will have an upper hand over Pyongyang, given the dependence that Pyongyang has on China. But then with Russia, I think Pyongyang feels that it's more of an equal basis. So I think we have to read this like a little small differences in their North Korea's bilateral relationship with its respective allies.
So amid that subtle competition between China and Russia, you do believe that Kim Jong-un will visit Beijing this year for a summit with President Xi?
I think that's probably an open invitation that the Chinese made to Kim Jong-un during this visit. But at the same time, I think it will also depend on how things play out in terms of, for instance, the election in the United States, as well as whether Vladimir Putin is going to come to North Korea after Putin visits China in the next couple of months.
Dr. Glinner, China has been somewhat distancing itself from deepening North Korea-Russia ties for various political and economic reasons. How do you foresee the trajectory of Pyongyang-Beijing relations going forward?
China has tacitly supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They didn't criticize it in the UN, and they've also criticized NATO's expansion and implicitly blaming that for Russia's military actions. But China doesn't want to be too closely aligned with the Russian invasion because they are more reliant on the international economic network than Russia is, and they fear that if they're too closely linked or seen as militarily supporting Russia, then it could induce sanctions against China. And so they haven't provided military assistance, or not much, but the trade between Russia and China has increased dramatically, and that has provided an economic lifeline to Russia as it faces international sanctions. And with China-North Korean relations, I think it'll continue to resume to where it was before. The trade had largely been cut off by North Korea during the COVID pandemic because they were so fearful of a pandemic crisis in North Korea. But it has slowly resumed. And as Dr. Gov't pointed out, they do want to maintain their preeminent status with North Korea. They see that the Russian relationship has eaten into that relationship. But North Korea is also, we've seen over the decades, very adept at playing off Moscow and Beijing against each other to get concessions or benefits while ceding little influence to either of those superpowers.
Now, Dr. Go, South Korea's second reconnaissance satellite was successfully launched aboard a SpaceX rocket. And Defense Minister Shin Won-sik says that there's a big technological gap between South Korean and North Korean spy satellites. Now, we've talked a little bit about this before, but marking the successful second launch of South Korea's satellite, give us a comparison.
Well, I definitely like the South Korean space satellite uses the cutting-edge technology that in two aspects. So, for instance, the North Korea's Arirang-1 space satellite, which the first attempt fell into the sea, and the Allied forces have been able to recover the debris and then analyze the content and gauge the technological advances that North Koreans have made. Concluded that the Arirang-1, the North Korean space satellite, only used essentially a very simple optical device, essentially a camera, which had a very low resolution, apparently the resolution of 10 meters. So as a spy satellite, the North Korean Arirang-1 didn't really serve use for military purpose because it really doesn't really make sense to, it's very difficult to tell photograph and then try to tell apart whether it's a weapon system or not when the photograph has only has a resolution of 10 meters. Whereas with the South Korean space satellites, we're talking about two different types here. One, that's the one that was launched last year. It's an electro-optical satellite that has a very high resolution. It's speculated to have less than 1 meter of a resolution. It's much more precise, and also it's much more advanced than the North Korean one for obvious reasons. But then what the South Korean side launched this time, it's not in an optical spy satellite anymore. We're talking about a synthetic aperture radar satellite. So what it means is that now the South Korean side can use radio waves to visualize essentially the objects on the ground. So we're talking about the ability of radars to look through, pierce the cloud cover at night and visualize what's on the ground. So we have moved from the visible spectrum of light to an invisible spectrum of light. So it means that the South Korea's space satellites will be able to survey over North Korea regardless of weather conditions, for instance. And it's not just one single satellite that South Korean side is launching. We're talking about 3 3 more. So in completion, South Korean side will have 1 electro-optical satellite, and in addition to that, there will be 4 more SAR, or like a synthetic aperture radar satellites. So the reason why South Koreans are launching this many spy satellites is because South Korea wants to complete the so-called 3-axis system, the idea of implementing a kill chain to detect and preempt North Korea's missile attacks against the South or the South Korea's allies. So I think this is taking, it's on schedule, and it's taking a lot of advancing up at a pace that the North Koreans cannot match. I think therein lies the confidence that the South Korean defense minister is showing right now.
And Dr. Klingner, North Korea has completed all preparations and is now ready to launch its second spy satellite, according to various reports. Do you expect the launch to come within this month? And how would the second satellite be different from the first one?
It very well may, the launch may occur this month, and some even thought it might happen today on the anniversary of Kim Il-sung's birth. What North Korea has done is vowed to send up perhaps 3 more satellites this year. And so the difference is that the second one may have a better camera on it than the first. We're still really uncertain as to the capability of their imagery camera. The images that they've released have been quite poor, but when back in December when they did a launch, when the imagery was released, the North Koreans responded like, well, you wouldn't expect us to put the really good camera on the initial test launch. So what they may do is have a better resolution, but if they don't release the imagery, then we won't know how good it is. But having multiple imagery satellites up there provides greater coverage, greater frequency of coverage of South Korea as well as other military targets. If you just have one, you're reliant on whenever that satellite's orbits pass over North Korea. But if you have several, then you can have multiple images of South Korea or other targets during the day. So it'll give them greater monitoring capabilities, but it depends on the quality of the imagery. However, I was an intelligence analyst, imagery analyst with CIA and DIA for a number of years. And even with poor quality imagery, you can do a number of things. You can detect if units are in garrison or not, whether they're out in a training field, whether they're in positions preparing for an invasion or not. And also, South Korea is a much more open society than the North. So North Korea can get a lot more information from other sources that they couldn't get, that the South can't get of the North. So it will give them capabilities, but it remains uncertain just how good the imagery will be.
So the quality of the imagery remains to be seen, but it will definitely help North Korea boost its surveillance. Now, Dr. Ko, as North Korea boosted ties with China, U.S. President Joe Biden held a summit with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida last week, and the two agreed on a historic defense upgrade between the two allied nations, which is aimed at countering China's perceived threat in the region. How would this affect South Korea?
So it's very simple. It's what the latest summit between President Biden and the Prime Minister Kishida has achieved is essentially making the U.S.-Japan alliance very similar to the ROK-U.S. alliance. So ROK-U.S. alliance is primarily about the military alliance, about the military cooperation or the joint defense, and it's called the mutual defense treaty for that matter. So the South Korean military and the U.S. military have a combined forces command. There's a joint, single, unitary chain of command here in Korea to defend South Korea against the threats from the outside. With Japan, United States doesn't have such a command structure. It's more of a little bit of a, I would say, it's more of ambiguity there. And then what this summit has pointed at is that there will be less ambiguity, more clarity about the unity of command between the American forces and the Japanese forces. And this creates some concern among some quarters that it would necessarily mean the upgrading of the Japanese military capability, even like making Japan a quote-unquote a normal country with a military capability that can be able to that is able to be projected abroad. And this is but at the same time, this is 21st century, and then we are talking about a new nature of threats in this part of the world. And this is the reason why the Chinese have reacted negatively to this statement, because the Chinese understand or believe this unity of command, or at least the objective of unifying the command between the United States and Japan, which is implied in the joint statement, is targeting China, especially in the East China Sea and South China Sea. So I think this is something that this clearly has an advantage of creating more deterrence against, not just against the Chinese, but also North Korea, but at the same time it's going to ruffle feathers in Beijing. I think it's going to be a challenge or like a task on the part of Washington and Tokyo to manage this situation.
And Dr. Klingner, before we let you go, President Biden showed support for the North Korea-Japan summit. What are your prospects for the summit coming to fruition, and what are the remaining obstacles between the two countries?
It was important for President Biden to show support for Japan's outreach to North Korea. Some had thought that perhaps Japan was going on its own and not coordinating with South Korea and the U.S. But I think clearly there's been a lot of coordination behind the scenes amongst the three countries. And whether the summit occurs, I'm pretty skeptical, because North Korea had clearly indicated that it was not interested in a summit if Japan wanted to raise either the abductee issue or denuclearization of North Korea. And Prime Minister Kishida indicated that, yes, they certainly want to have that on the agenda, that they're not capitulating to North Korea's conditions. So as long as Japan does that, then I think North Korea will be more reluctant to have a summit. But any kind of outreach to North Korea by the U.S., Japan, South Korea, I think is important. We do need to have talks, but we also need to talk about the things that are of interest to us. But Washington has indicated that they're not just wanting to talk about denuclearization, they're wanting to talk about risk reduction or confidence building measures, as well as economic assistance or other ways of improving relations or reducing tension. So really the ball is, as it has been for quite some time, in North Korea's court, but they've been rejecting all South Korean and U.S. and treaties for dialogue and clearly imposing a lot of conditionality on any engagement with Japan.
Well, both Seoul and Washington have officially said that they support the North Korea-Japan summit as long as they help in maintaining peace on the Korean peninsula. So we'll have to see if Kishida's efforts will yield some tangible results. Thank you so much, Dr. Klingner and Dr. Go, for sharing your perspectives.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.